Thanks for taking the time out of your busy Thursday brew schedules to join us for an hour of knowledge about lagers and all things lager brewing. We hope that this is just the first one in a long series of web seminars that we'll be co-hosting with our dear friend Alexei from Lallemand. And hopefully we'll get to cover all manner of beer styles, ingredients, products, and of course, best techniques. Why did we start off with the lager? I mean, I guess everyone in attendance can attest to the fact that lagers have had a crazy resurgence in the last couple of years, and I imagine that every single one representing a brewery here already has at least one lager in your core range, but you could always make them better. I mean, I'm not pointing any fingers at anyone specifically, but I guess all of us could brew our lagers a little bit more clean, a little bit more efficient, and maybe even try and innovate a little bit with the lager. And with all of this said, I'm Lauri from Baltic Brewing Supplies. So if you need any yeast, just let me know. And this old gentleman here is Alexei from Lallemand. He is the master in all things yeast related. So with that said, I'll give the floor over to Alexei to dazzle us with some lager knowledge.
Okay, so hello everyone. So my name is Alexei. I'm a technical sales manager for Lallemand Brewing in Baltics and Russia. I'm a graduated brewer with almost 18 years in the field. So together we will discuss lager production today. First, let me share my screen and we will start.
One very brief thing before we jump into the presentation is, if you guys have any questions throughout the webinar or whenever, just type them in the chat. We will do our best to try and cover as many of them as soon as possible. If we find a little bit of an opening in there, we'll just try and jump to a question. Alexei, are you still there? I can't hear anything from Alexei. Still nothing, Alexei? Sorry for the technical difficulties, but this is a live show. Alexei, I saw on your screen.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Mike was. Now you're back and your microphone is
let's
unmuted.
try it again. So I'm sharing my screen once more. Can you see it? Can you hear me?
All perfect. Now I hear and see the presentation.
Okay, so without any doubts, lager is the most popular beer in the world. And I'm sure that every brewer tried to brew it at least once, being tired of strong double hopped ales and heavily fruited sour beer smoothies. And nowadays we can see that a lot of craft brewers included at least one lager beer to their portfolio. Its color and flavor vary from light pilsners to Vienna lagers and dark German dunkels. But the brews, like all of them, share a delicate, clean, and balanced flavor profile. Of course, light versions of lagers dominate. Yet again, there are a lot of beer styles even within this category. There are such styles as pilsners, international pale lagers, American lager, strong lager, and so on and so forth. So, in any case, the final customers expect this beer to be crystal clear, without haze, without any off flavors. And industrial breweries are in privileged position here, since they have like the whole range of special equipment, starting with centrifuge, DE filters, and up to stabilization with PVPP filters and sterilizing filters, all this kind of stuff. So for small to medium breweries, having a centrifuge is already a big deal. So these producers have to use some tricks, and luckily there are some, like process aids, for example. We will discuss it today. So today we will run through the process of brewing lager beers. We all realize that it's impossible to touch like every aspect of the brewing process in just one presentation. Therefore, we will touch the most valuable aspects of this process. Let's say the ones that matters most for lagers. But why is it so special? Brewing lager may seem simple, but the process is more difficult than with ales. The main problem is it's like possible sensory defects can't be hid behind the strong flavors of malt, hops, or some other ingredients. So every mistake in ingredient selection, the brewing process itself will lead to unsatisfying result. And we will start with the raw material selection. So for lager, we use pretty basic brewing ingredients like water, malt, hops, and of course yeast. And balance is the key here because there shouldn't be any dominating flavor in lager. We'll start with water. So water has always been the defining element of the beer styles historically brewed in some regions. For example, with lager, the birthplace of Pilsner style is Czech Republic, and the water of River Pilsen located there is still considered the standard for light lagers. This water is very soft and low on minerals, including carbonates and sulfates. The mineral composition basically contributes to the clean flavor profile of the lager beer. Basically, the flavor profile you can see on this slide right here. And however, for better yeast flocculation, it's always a good idea to increase the calcium level over here, at least up to 50 ppm or milligrams per liter. And again, historically, base malts available at, let's say, dawn of the lager brewing were darker than nowadays, even though they were considered as light. Therefore, they were more acidic than modern Pilsner malts, and in combination with some specific meshing techniques, like decoction, for example, soft water helped to reach desired pH levels for effective starch conversion without adding any dark malts, even though no one really knew what is the pH level in those days. So for us modern brewers, it's not a problem, of course. We can easily correct the pH to the optimal range using food-grade acids like lactic, for example. But in terms of reaching balanced and clean, crisp flavor, soft, close to osmotic, I would say, water is the best option. So next, malt. Lagers typically use lightly kilned malt, traditionally Pilsner. Ideally, this malt should be well modified with high enzyme levels. And for some lagers, adding adjuncts such as rice or corn up to 15-20% of the grist is quite a common thing. Again, with a well-modified base malt, you wouldn't even need to add some kind of additional enzymes. Additional enzymes. These adjuncts will decrease body of the beer, and it will also be lighter in color. There is one more thing that should be taken into consideration, kept in mind, especially if adjuncts is being used, especially for lager. And that is the free amino nitrogen level, or FAN for short. So such cereal as rice or corn wouldn't contain any protein. Therefore, there might be a lack of amino acids in the wort, which is not a very good thing from the yeast point of view, let's say. So we will discuss it further. Then hops. The main idea here is to be more, let's say, modest in terms of strong hop flavor. Traditionally, brewers use bitter hops varieties with clean and neutral bitterness. My absolute favorite here will be Magnum for the boil. And then aromatic hops, traditionally European, at the end of the boil, such as Saaz, Hallertauer, Spalter Select, and Tanger. Of course, there are other options available nowadays, like we have plenty of hops, but again, try to keep balance in overall flavor and basically just follow the BGCP guidelines. And of course, dry hopping is not traditional for lager production. That's already the field of craft brewing. That's kind of IPL already. So yeah, just keep the balance. The most defining ingredient of lager style is the Saccharomyces pasterianus yeast. So Saccharomyces pasterianus is a bottom fermenting yeast. That means that at the end of the fermentation, it tends to settle to the bottom of the fermentation vessel. Ale yeast, as we know, is a top fermenter and can be harvested from the top of the fermentation vessel. That's their, let's say, main difference between them. So lager yeast can ferment at cooler temperatures, which on one hand leads to a clean profile of the beer with less off flavors. At the same time, with less active fermentations, it's harder for this yeast to reabsorb these possible off flavors. That's why it takes longer, and that's why for lager production, long maturation or lagering is quite common thing. But in general, lager yeast tends to create greater concentrations of sulfur compounds. Oh yeah, and there is one more feature of this yeast. Lager yeast will ferment some specific sugars like melibbiose, for example. So where this yeast came from? It is believed that this yeast occurred somewhere in the 16th century through the natural hybridization through between Saccharomyces cerevisiae with another microorganism that was discovered only in the 21st century. In 2006, microbiologists found a special variety of yeast in this spherical growth on southern beech trees in Patagonia. And it was found that its genes are 99.5% identical to the second parent of the lager yeast. And this strain was named Saccharomyces eubayanus. So basically, lager yeast or Saccharomyces pasterianus is a hybrid of Saccharomyces cerevisiae and Saccharomyces eubayanus. Since this yeast first appeared at brewery and it's impossible to find these strains in nature, driving factor of pasterianus yeast evolution were brewers. So through centuries, they decided which yeast demonstrated the best fermentation performance and therefore was repitched, and what yeast wasn't that effective for brewing and was extinct. This led to some kind of weird situation that most of lager yeasts are very similar, and in like the whole yeast range, we have only two groups of lager yeast nowadays. Again, until recently, of course. So these groups are classified based on their genome, and the first one is called Saaz. It contains two sets of chromosomes from eubayanus and one set of chromosomes from cerevisiae parental strains. So these strains are more like their, let's say, wild parent. They ferment better at lower temperatures. They produce less esters, poor in maltotriose uptake. Therefore, the attenuation is lower, and the fermentation process itself is a little bit slower. Then we have group 2, Flochberg. Basically, most of commercially available lager yeast nowadays belong to this group. So these strains have roughly equal contribution of their parents' genome, like 2 sets of chromosomes from Eubayanus and 2 sets of chromosomes from Cerevisiae. That makes this yeast more robust. They can ferment at higher temperatures, faster, and with higher tolerance to alcohol. At certain conditions, these strains are able to produce a little bit more esters. And just a few years ago, a new method of lager yeast hybridization was developed, which gave us a brand new group 3 of lager yeast. This yeast has even more genome from Cerevisiae parent, like 3 sets of chromosomes, with just 1 set of chromosome from Eubayanus. That makes these strains even more robust, with the wider fermentation temperature range, lower pitching rate, and less of flavor production compared to, let's say, traditional groups 1 and 2. So knowing all that, we discussed basically the raw materials that we use for lager production. We can take a closer look at the production cycle. And we will start with the mashing. So since lightly kilned malt might not be the best quality and unmalted adjuncts might be added to the grist, a traditional lager mashing includes multiple rest times and different temperatures. Historically, this was achieved using decoction. Now it's possible to reach these rest temperatures by just heating the mash tun directly. And depending on the quality of the malt, grist composition, or maybe even personal preferences, you might choose one of 3 mashing options. The first one is less traditional for lager brewing, I would say. It's single infusion. It's mostly used for ale production, since pale ale malt is more well modified. You can skip some steps of the mashing process. So with the lagers, that would work only if the malt you use is truly the best quality possible. So if not, this method will require the use of process aids or enzymes to achieve basically the same results. Some levels of flaked rice and corn, maybe barley, are acceptable, since the starch is already gelatinized. Next one, the most common method now, is the step mash. So step mash allows to use poor quality malt and higher adjunct rates, since it's possible to hold the mash at different temperatures to promote the activity of specific enzymes. But in terms of adjuncts like rice and corn, again, it should be flaked with pre-gelatinized starch. And each temperature step has a specific function. So it's kind of basic, but it never hurts to repeat it. So the first one, the one which is rarely used, at least I've never seen this one in the lager recipe, that's the acid rest at 35 degrees Celsius. It allows phytase enzyme to lower the pH of the mash. The most of brewers would just add the lactic acid. So in most cases, you would just skip this rest. The next one is beta-glucan rest at approximately 45 degrees Celsius, allows beta-glucanase enzymes to break down beta-glucans. It reduces wort viscosity and improve filtration times. With lower quality malt, this step is absolutely necessary. The next one is protein rest at roughly 52 to 55 degrees Celsius. And this temperature, proteolytic enzyme break down proteins into smaller peptides, and most importantly, amino acids. This will contribute to the total free amino nitrogen level in the wort. The next one is saccharification rest around 63 degrees Celsius, where alpha and beta amylases break down starch into smaller fermentable sugars. This rest is held until starch conversion is finished. Usually it takes around 45 to 60 minutes, but usually this to speed up the process, the meshing temperature is raised up to 72 degrees to promote alpha amylase activity. And this enzyme will break down long starch chains to shorter ones, and hence beta amylase can produce maltose molecules faster. The final step is mash out at 78 degrees Celsius. And the point of this rest is to inactivate enzyme activity and also to lower viscosity for easier lautering. So here you can see a typical meshing procedure, let's say with a medium quality malt. So the exact temperatures and times for step mesh, of course, can differ from this graph, but this is just, let's say, an example. So let's say that we believe the malt do not have a high level of beta-glucans, so we can skip the temperatures lower than 52 degrees Celsius. Let's assume that we added some, I don't know, rice flakes or for Japanese style lager, or probably there will be some kind of lack of fan, or maybe it's just not the best malt containing a lot of proteins. So we will just put some effort into converting it to smaller peptides and amino acids. So, and by the way, that will increase the sugars yield. Yeah. So we will hold the mash at 52 degrees Celsius for roughly 15 minutes. Then we raise the temperature up to 63 degrees Celsius and hold this rest for around 30 minutes. Then raise the temperature to 72 for another 15. That's usually more than enough. Of course, you can check it with the iodine test. And then finally, the temperature is risen up to mash out temperature of 78 degrees Celsius for another 5 minutes. Again, this is a typical standard meshing regime. Of course, it varies depending on raw materials, on the equipment you use, and many, many other factors. Okay, the last one is decoction. I would say a very controversial method. Some brewers say that this is the only way to brew authentic lager, and they will feel it they will feel if it was produced with this method every time. Others say that this is just waste of energy and time, and the same notes and flavor can be easily reached using some special malts. But historically, again, this method was used for poorly modified malts, which in those times was all like that. Basically, what is this method? The temperature is increased by removing a portion of the mash to another heated vessel, boiling it up to break the starch physically, and then returning it back to the main mash, hence increasing its temperature. So knowing the initial temperature, the volume of the mash in the mashing tun, and obviously the temperature of the return portion of the mash, you can count the volume you should have removed to increase the temperature of the mash to the desired value. I hope it wasn't too difficult. So obviously, you need a spare vessel to boil the part of the mash. That's a limiting factor for some brewers. Decoction helps to increase extract from poorly modified malt. One of the features of decoction that we have already mentioned is that during the boiling of the part of the mash, browning reaction occurs. This gives the wort distinct flavor of, I don't know, some kind of range starting from grainy to bread crust or caramel. And and playing with time of boiling this part of the mash, you can get these different flavors. What makes this method really useful is that it makes it possible to use raw rice and corn, because when you boil it, it will break down the starch with a higher gelatinized point. Okay, so as we have already mentioned a few times, fan level in wort is crucial. So why is it important? It will affect yeast general health, their ability to grow and multiply. And for lager, we will need a lot of yeast, by the way. So fan level will directly impact the level of some off flavors like diacetyl or H2S, which basically are the byproducts of amino acid synthesis. So therefore, a sufficient level of free amino nitrogen, which is in general amino acids, makes it, let's say, unnecessary for the yeast to synthesize them. And the minimal level of free amino nitrogen is around 150 ppm. But in literature, you can find recommendations up to 200 or even 230 ppm of fan. How can we increase the level of fan in the wort? So again, use well-modified malt. If this is the malt from a well-known producer, you do not add any adjuncts. There should not be any issues with the fan level. If you add some adjuncts or the malt is, let's say, not the best quality, the next easiest thing would be the protein rest. So 10, 15, 20 minutes, depending on the raw materials quality, might be more than enough. Then you can use complex nutrients. They include not only vitamins and some essential minerals, but also organic and inorganic sources of nitrogen. And adding nutrients like Yeast Life Extra can ensure healthy fermentation from generation to generation. And the final option would be using a neutral protease enzyme during the mashing process. But there are some additional enzymes that might be used during the mashing process to improve efficiency, yields, and basically product quality. So there is glucanase. It may be added to the mash to break down beta-glucans and improve filtration, again, for poorly modified malt. Glucoamylase may be added to the mash or fermenter to break down starches and dextrins into glucose to increase attenuation and get more dry beer. And alpha amylases may be added to the mash to reduce wort viscosity because of the starch and increase wort fermentability. Okay, so let's go to the next step, and that is wort boiling. And first we will discuss such easy and at the same time important thing as active boiling. So first and foremost, it helps to form protein polyphenol complexes that not only removes potential haze, but also ensures healthier fermentation. So first of all, these proteins can stick to the yeast cells and slow their metabolism, but they also can cause early sedimentation. So for vigorous boiling, if you have issues with over-foaming, you might use anti-foams like foam salt, for example, to, again, increase the kettle capacity and increase hop utilization. If poor quality raw materials containing a lot of proteins are used, or the configuration of whirlpool is not perfect. Word clarifiers such as compact CG can be used to remove haze-positive proteins, increase colloidal stability, and also improve hot trap compaction in the whirlpool, which basically reduces waste. This fining agent is based on carrageenan, which is like perfectly natural product. It's not some kind of chemistry or something like that. And for lager production, vigorous boiling is especially important for flavor control, because that is the step when DMS is being formed and removed. So lightly kilned malt that is generally used to brew lagers, as we discussed, is known to contain the largest amount of edema as precursor. The compound is called S-methylmethionine, which, when it's heated above 70 degrees Celsius, it turns into DMS, which has the smell of cooked corn or vegetables. Some people say that at the threshold level, it can highlight the maltiness or in the beer. But again, when it's exceeded, everything is not so longer great. And this reaction of conversion SMM to DMS is more rapid at higher pH. So it's quite easy to get rid of this off flavor in beer. First and foremost, active boiling allows DMS to easily evaporate from the wort because this compound is really volatile. However, the kettle should be well ventilated, so the steam should be removed, and so the condensate doesn't get back to the wort. To ensure all SMM is converted to DMS and DMS was eliminated, boil at around 60 to 90 minutes is more than enough. We've already mentioned that low pH slows down the transformation of S-methylmethionine to DMS. So correcting the pH of the wort should be carried out closer to the end of the boil. Well, how it's usually done. The wort also needs to be cooled quickly, since in the kettle or whirlpool, S-methylmethionine can continue to turn into dimethyl sulfide. But there is no longer boiling to evaporate it. And ideally, it should take no longer than 2 hours from the moment of the end of the boil to the moment when the wort gets into the fermentation vessel. But again, anything can happen. You know, a program failure, CCT wasn't prepared in time. I don't know. Now I'm stepping into the craft field, but let's imagine that the IPL is brewed and a brewer decided to add hops at whirlpool at 80 degrees Celsius. That also takes a lot of time. So it's better to vigorously boil the wort to support this conversion of SMM to DMS, so you wouldn't deal with it after.
How do you mean takes a lot of time? Whirlpool, it's not a very long process.
To cool down your wort, get it back to the kettle or to whirlpool, then you add hops. All of that will take, I don't know, an extra 30 to 40 minutes.
If you're working on a prehistoric slow system, maybe. Otherwise, it shouldn't be that complicated or take that long. Anyway,
there are different systems.
Sure.
So the basic idea, if it's not necessary to hold your beer in whirlpool, try to transfer it to the fermentation vessel as soon as possible. Okay, and the next step is aeration. Oxygen is a growth factor for the yeast. Without it, it's impossible to grow enough biomass to perform the effective fermentation. I need to mention, however, that if dry yeast is used for the very first time, the aeration step can be skipped since the yeast has enough sterols. But starting with the next generation, which will be the first one, you should aerate your wort as usual as with liquid yeast. So the rule of thumb is 1 ppm of air per 1 degree plate of the wort. And over aeration is just as bad as under aeration, because in this case you will produce more cells than needed, and that is first of all, that's unnecessary waste, and the second thing, that excessive growth can lead to some of flavors. Because normally it should be around 3 to 4 cells divisions during fermentation. For lager fermentation, it is if it's a liquid yeast, you should pitch approximately 1 to 1.5 millions of healthy active yeast cells per milliliter per 1 degree plate of wort. For ale yeast, for comparison, this quantity should be around 0.7 to 1 million of cells per milliliter per degree of wort. So again, for lager yeast, you should have, for lager beer, you should have a lot of yeast. And now we switch to the cold side of the lager production, fermentation. So most commercial lager fermentations are in the range of 8 to 12 degrees Celsius, I would say. Since yeast multiplication and metabolism is slower at lower temperatures, the yeast produces lower levels of acetaldehyde, H2S, and diacetyl. But as we already discussed, at the same time, these compounds are also less volatile at these lower temperatures and not being removed with the CO2 during fermentation, because it's not like vigorously fermenting. As a result, lager beers have longer maturation times to ensure these flavors are reduced to a minimum level possible. And fermentation at warmer temperatures can result in stress, which leads to very high levels of some flavors. That's why with traditional lager yeast, you should avoid any changes in fermentation temperatures, as it will inevitably, inevitably change the beer profile. So the first flavor associated with the fermentation process, and I believe the first one that comes to mind when you imagine lager, is diacetyl. So diacetyl is a fermentation byproduct that is perceived as butter or butterscotch, and can have this slicky sensation on the tongue. So diacetyl is a byproduct of valine biosynthesis in yeast. As we discussed already, FAN deficiencies will lead to higher levels of diacetyl in beer. So for instance, adding roughly 20% of adjuncts will double the potential diacetyl level in beer, and 40% of adjuncts will double it again. So during this process, compound called alpha-acetolactate is formed, and it leaks out of the cell to the green beer, where it chemically converts into diacetyl. The quantity of alpha-acetolactate produced is a strain-dependent trait, by the way. So that means that even with the same level of FAN available, different strains will produce different levels of alpha-acetolactate. First of all, that's because even with the adequate levels of valine in the wort, most lager strains just cannot effectively utilize it compared to ale yeast and lager strains from group 3. So this newly formed diacetyl may then be reabsorbed by the yeast and further reduced to acetane, which has much higher threshold level. So basically we can't perceive this flavor. And the last parameter that should be taken into consideration is the beer pH. So if it's higher than a 4.5, conversion of alpha acetolactate to diacetyl goes slower. How can we reduce diacetyl level? So first, ensure sufficient wort nutrition and choose the right strain. We will discuss it further. Since alpha-acetolactate to diacetyl conversion is more efficient at the pH level around 4.2, 4.4, adjust the pH of the wort at the end of the boil. So just so the yeast could reach the desired pH level faster and easily. At the same time, pitch enough yeast. Again, more yeast means that these cells can drop the pH faster first, but also excessive yeast growth because of the underpitching will lead to the excessive valence synthesis, which obvious consequences with higher levels of diacetyl. Then make sure you have enough yeast cells at the end of the fermentation. So just avoid early flocculation or yeast removal. So again, once the beer is cooled down or filtered, if the yeast is removed anyhow, there is nothing you can really do with diacetyl. So, almost nothing. Basically, you can add more viable actively fermented yeast so they could kind of reabsorb diacetyl from this batch of beer, a process called crotining. And finally, since any chemical reaction goes faster at higher temperatures, raising it closer to the end of the fermentation, well, maybe not the correct term here, closer to the last 1/3 of the fermentation will help to convert alpha-acetolactate to diacetyl. That's the process called diacetyl rest. To perform diacetyl rest, increase the temperature of fermentation by 2 to 4 degrees Celsius and hold this temperature for, let's say, 1 to up to 2 days after full attenuation reached. Again, depending on the amount of diacetyl in beer, depending on the raw materials you used, like many factors. The beer may be cooled immediately after diacetyl and alpha-acetolactate levels are below threshold levels. And this can be measured using gas chromatography, but not so much breweries has gas chromatography on their facility. But they can go through the sensory after performing forced diacetyl test, where you take a sample of the beer, you heat it up to force this conversion of alpha-acetolactate to diacetyl. And if you don't sense any differences between the control sample, that means that all conversion is complete, and you can just cool down the beer, that everything's fine. Okay. And there is one more option how to prevent diacetyl formation, in the first place. So it can be inhibited by using acetolactate decarboxylase enzyme, or short ALDC. It converts alpha-acetolactate directly to acetane, missing all these steps outside and inside of the yeast cell. But the most important thing that ALDC cannot remove diacetyl from the finished beer. So it works only with alpha-acetolactate. So therefore, ALDC must be added to the wort at the start of the fermentation when the pH is higher and basically alpha-acetolactate is only accumulating in beer. Sorry. Okay, so the next one is the next off flavor often associated with lager is the flavor of boiled or rotten eggs, which is hydrogen sulfide, or H2S for short. On a threshold level, this flavor adds freshness to the beer, a controversial point of view. In most cases, it's considered as an off flavor. So just as diacetyl, H2S is produced by normal yeast metabolism. So during this process, H2S leaks out of the cell and will be partly removed with the CO2, but the rest of it will be lately reabsorbed at the end of the fermentation by the yeast itself. So production of H2S is strongly yeast dependent. We've already discussed that lager yeast in general tend to produce it more, but the amount of it can vary from strain to strain. The production of high concentrations of H2S can occur because of yeast stress, which could be caused by, first of all, poor yeast vitality, insufficient pitching rates, wort nitrogen deficiency. There is an inverse relationship between the fan level and H2S concentration. But it's not only nitrogen. Yeast also needs some specific vitamins like B5 and some minerals like zinc. So these additional factors, they also reduce the level of H2S produced during the fermentation. And yes, the fermentation temperatures changes is also a stress factor for the yeast. So, and the last thing, oxidation during late fermentation, beer transfer, or packaging can also cause raising of the H2S levels in the finished beer. So the thing is, oxygen can reactivate yeast metabolism, but since all of nutrients will be consumed by that time, it will result in H2S production. So how it can be controlled? First of all, again, ensure an adequate pitch rate of healthy yeast. If you have enough yeast cells during the fermentation, and most importantly at the end of the boil, so they could reabsorb the H2S, that will be a big deal already. So use complex nutrients like the one already mentioned, Yeast Life Extra. And try to avoid contact with oxygen in late stages or after fermentation is complete. By the way, I need to mention here that the off flavors that we discussed today may be the result of metabolism of other microorganism contaminants. So always follow best practices in cleaning or sanitizing all equipment, all brewing equipment. Basically, this is something you can't overdo. Okay, so now we've mentioned a few times already that yeast strain is really important for lager production, that off flavors production is strain-dependent thing, that lager yeast are different from ale. So what options do we recommend? So first of all, we have for the yeast selection, it might be traditional lager strain from group 2, and that's Lalbrew Diamond. So that's a neutral lager yeast with high attenuation and flocculation. Standard fermentation temperature for lagers around 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. Can be used for all lager styles you can imagine. At some specific conditions, you can get some levels of diacetyl and H2S flavors with it. Believe me or not, but sometimes I get this question like, how can I get some diacetyl in my beer just because my customers are used to it and basically demand this beer with these flavors? So, okay.
They want the Keller pills.
Sorry?
They just want a Keller pills.
Maybe. So, okay. Not following some of the recommendations for clean lagers might cause these desired notes. But however, with the best practices we have just discussed, you will get a clean, nice, crisp, traditional lager. The next option is not so traditional, I would say. However, It's still possible to produce lager-like beers using neutral, cold-tolerant Saccharomyces cerevisiae strain like Nottingham over here. So since it can ferment at 10 degrees Celsius, you can produce lager-like beer. Again, since it's Cerevisia and not Pastorianas, the beer flavor might be slightly different from authentic. This strain is still neutral, especially if it ferments at the lower end of the temperature range. Since it's Cerevisia, the pitching rate is lower, alcohol tolerance is a bit higher, and the most important thing here that Nottingham is a perfect home strain. So it can be used for basically every beer style. So if a brewery doesn't want to have different strains for ales and lagers, well, this is the one.
Quick question here.
Finally, we have... yeah, sure.
May I? Because this is something that comes up quite a lot, and I imagine at least a few of our listeners might be interested in it as well. How does it take to fermenting under pressure, especially at low temperatures? Very common to, for example, just ferment and condition your beer in a corny keg under pressure. How does the Nottingham take to it? Because most lager strains are pretty much okay with it.
Well, Nottingham will work perfectly as well. I can see any issues with that. The only thing you need to take care into consideration that while you ferment under pressure, the higher amount of acetaldehyde would occur in your beer. That's the only limiting factor. But in terms of performance, Nottingham will work like the best way possible.
Okay, well, that's good because at least quite a few of the age strains aren't super happy about having pressure involved. But Nottingham, you go.
Well, Nottingham, I think it's the most versatile strain in our portfolio because it's the most alcohol tolerant. It's the most, let's say, sour beer tolerant. So it works better at sour worts. Again, high gravity fermentations, like it will manage all of them. So,
but it also works really well in like super low alcohol ABV beers as well. So,
yeah, sure, why not?
What a workhorse.
Okay. Finally, we have Brew NovAL Lager, which is the first commercial example of Group 3 lager yeast. So this novel strain has some unique characteristics like fast fermentation and high attenuation to produce crisp, highly attenuated lagers. Short maturation times since it doesn't produce H2S and produce twice as low diacetyl as typical lager strains. Unique flavor profile, slightly fruity and clean. The most impressive thing that it doesn't change in the whole fermentation temperature range up to 20 degrees Celsius. So we conducted a few trials with the split batch beers. So the recipe was the same. The only thing that was different was the fermentation temperature. And that beer was later tested by the customers, and they couldn't see any difference. And moreover, we ran these beers through the gas chromatography analysis, and the difference in aroma compounds was really insignificant. So what was different, it was the fermentation speed. So when you ferment warm, the fermentation might end on day 4 to 5 already. So together with the shorter maturation period, it may reduce the whole production cycle of the beer. And since this strain is more robust due to the higher contribution of Cerevisia genome, this yeast has lower pitch rates compared to traditional lager strains. It's more like for ales. And one of the most impressive features of this strain is a short maturation period. So first of all, in terms of diacetyl, as I already mentioned, even if there is enough amino acids, valine in particular, there is a limitation in valine uptake. As you can see from the graph over here, like typical lager yeast cannot effectively utilize this amino acid, and it stays in the media. NovAL Lager, on the other hand, behaves more like ale yeast, so which results in lower diacetyl levels produced during fermentation. Therefore, it takes less time to reabsorb this diacetyl from the beer already. As for the H2S, one of the parental strain that was used in breeding process of this yeast, has a very unique trait. It uses all the sulfur from the media to synthesize amino acids instead of H2S. So this parent and its hybrid doesn't produce H2S at all. So at the graph, you can see basically the difference. The teal line is the amount of H2S produced by a traditional lager yeast, Labrador Diamond, and the yellow line is another typical lager strain. So you can see that the line goes as high as 1,800 ppm. Ale yeast, on the contrary, like Nottingham, by the way, produces around 15 ppm of H2S, maybe 17, something like that. And here is NovAL Lager. So this gradient line staying on 0. So as I always say, this yeast forgives brewers' mistakes. So even with significant changes in temperature or potential yeast stress, you will still have clean and crisp lager with this yeast. Okay, no matter what yeast you choose, you have to follow yeast management best practices. So we've already discussed at several occasions that it's necessary to pitch enough yeast cells. And this number is higher for lager compared to ales. So an adequate pitch rate ensures vigorous fermentation, full attenuation of the beer, and reduced off flavors. Usually, yeast pitched into the wort at slightly cooler temperatures, around 2 degrees Celsius, to reach the primary fermentation temperature. So that means with traditional yeast, this temperature will be around 8 to 10 degrees Celsius, with the fermentation at around 10 to 12. With NovAL Lager, since you can ferment at higher temperatures, it can be around 16 or even 18 degrees Celsius. When repitched, harvest the yeast as early as possible to get the highest viability. So it's usually done 24 hours prior to achieving full attenuation. It may be possible to harvest earlier if the slurry is dense enough, just to avoid beer losses. And basically, recommendations for lager yeast repitching are the same as with ales. So the optimal number of generations is around 4 to 5, but this number can be raised up to 8 to 10 generations by using good sanitation practices. If you check your yeast viability, which should be more higher than 95%, and if you harvest only the middle layer of the most viable cells over here. So using more than that number is not recommended, because some small mutations occurs, and it might cause changes in flavor and maybe even some issues with flocculation and attenuation. So if you harvested the yeast and you won't use it straight away, just store it at the temperature around 2 to 4 degrees Celsius for no longer than 3 days. That's it with the yeast management. And now we come closer to the final steps of lager production. That's maturation. Includes not only reducing of some off flavors, but also colloidal stabilization. A good practice is to hold the beer at -1 degree Celsius for around at least 2 weeks. So the beer is crystal clear and stable with the same color, with the same flavor, etc. Because basically that's what people expect from lager. With the lack of special equipment I mentioned at the very beginning, there is another option of using process aids to reduce waste, improve quality of the beer and stability of the beer. And first, we will talk about the beer finings. Sometimes it takes longer for beer to become crystal clear. It might be caused by the yeast cells or protein or both. And beer fining agents, they can significantly increase the speed of sedimentation of these particles. So they basically they do this by binding to these haze-causing particles, increasing their size, which results in faster sedimentation. So simple as it is. There are many options to choose from, including traditional isinglass like cryofine. That is beer fining that has been used for many years already, based on collagen obtained from the fish swim bladders. Isinglass carries both positive and negative charge. Let's say overall positive charge with negative areas. And therefore it binds negatively charged yeast cells and positively charged proteins. There is a vegan pectin-based option like Protofine. It also binds to proteins and yeast in beer like isinglass. At the same time, it has a rapid action. So it works already within 2 hours and has a significant effect on transparency within 24 hours. And the last one is silica sol clarifiers. They work mostly with proteins. But again, when they bind to proteins, they precipitate out of the solution and might, let's say, catch yeast cells into their matrix. And since silica sols primarily target proteins, it can be used in a kettle instead of carrageenan, the one we discussed already. Another group of process aids is antioxidants. So their function is to scavenge dissolved oxygen and block staling reactions. So they slow the formation of carbonyl compounds, particularly trans-2-nonenal, which has this specific flavor of wet carton, which basically results in improved flavor and colloidal stability and slower rates of color change. We have a few options of antioxidants, Vicant SB and Vicant SBX. The first one works better at bright tank, improving flavor and color stability. The second one works better on the hot side, not only preventing the oxidation, but also improving colloidal stability, binding with haze-sensitive proteins. And here you can see the effect of Vicant SB. These beers were oxidized and heated, but one with antioxidant stays light in color compared to the control. And of course, I mentioned just some of the process aids available on the market and in our portfolio, but this is a big separate topic. We cannot fit it during this conversation, that's for sure. Okay, so what can I say in conclusion? So control your brewing process and use your senses to detect off flavors. The best option here will be gathering a sensory panel out of your colleagues. So doing that, you can achieve consistency and high quality of your lagers. And like whether you are a large multinational brewery or a smaller craft brewery or a home brewer, with NovAL Lager strains, with available process aids, lager brewing has never been more accessible to try. Thank you very much for the attention. You can see all the contacts of myself and Lori and Baltic Brewing Supplies over here. Now I need to turn off my presentation so I can see all of you. I need to stop sharing.
And we're back.
And we are trying to go back. Oh, yeah.
So, first off, thank you very much for this absolutely interesting presentation. I have brewed many a lager in my lifetime, but I mean, I'm pretty sure I also had a few things to kind of take away and put away in the big old trunk of brewing knowledge. One thing, first off, this is not a question, but I'm just spending time a little bit because I wanted to bring out that all of our dear listeners are absolutely welcome to pose any questions they have, because this is right about the last chance for today to ask questions. But we had so much talk about badly modified malts. I just feel the need to clarify that since the majority of the listeners are our customers with Baltic Brewing Supplies, I don't think they know what badly modified malts are. But that's not relevant. Another one that's also not so much question as it is maybe a thought exercise and another way to spend more time to have our listeners come up with some more questions is, if you got handed the keys to a brewery and said like, okay, you need to make one lager today that we can put on the market in like 6 weeks, and this is going to have to save the brewery, make your platonic ideal of a lager, something that's, you know, just like the best lager you can imagine. What do you reckon? What would go in there? Start off with a very simple malt base. Which yeast would you choose? What hop combination would you use? Which of the various methods of lager producing would you go for? Would you do decoction? Would you go single infusion?
Well, maybe I'm going the simplest way, but I would do something Pilsner-like. So without any special malts, just Pilsner malt, that's it. Maybe adding some level of corn and rice to get this beer more crispy. I would go for rice. I think around 10% of rice flakes. So just...
But no dextrin or anything of that kind to kind of enhance the mouthfeel and foam retention and stuff.
That's another option. I'm going, let's say, more into this dry beer field, because adding rice will get you lower body, more crispy sensation of the beer. So again, 90% of light malt, Pilsner preferably, then around 10% of rice flakes. Standard mashing, the one I described, like the step mash. Again, depending on the raw materials I choose, depending on the country where I'm going to brew. So I would start rather from 52 degrees Celsius or straight from 63, holding it for, let's say, around 30 minutes. Then go straight to 72 for another 15 and then mash out. So simple as that. For hops, I would choose Magnum. This is my absolute favorite in terms of cocoa melon contain, in terms of the flavor it gives to the beer. So Magnum.
So it wouldn't only be in the boil, but also in the whirlpool.
No, Magnum just for the boil.
Okay.
And maybe Hallertauer Mitterflu for aroma at the last 5 minutes of the boil. What else? For the yeast, I would definitely take NovAL Lager, not just because I'm promoting it. It's just really more simple to work with this yeast. So, and since I'm not trying to make, beer for some kind of BGCP contest or something, so I'm not bind to these strict rules like no esters in your beer, like you can do that. No, I'm trying to make something like a perfect beer for every day, so everyone would like. So these fresh notes of fruits would work just perfectly. So I would take NovAL Lager, and I think I would ferment it around 15 degrees Celsius to just get this. Basically, the main features of this yeast, you can ferment higher. So you won't implement the acetyl rest. It will take shorter for the beer to be finished. So fermenting at 15 degrees Celsius for maybe 6 to 7 days. 7 days. Then crush cool the beer. Hold it for at least 2 weeks for colloidal stabilization. And depending on the brewery where I'm at and what equipment I have, maybe I will use some kind of clarifiers if I don't have centrifuge or DE filter or something. Because my idea of lager, it should be crystal clear. That's basically it, I would say.
I mean, just going by what you just described, I would say imaginary brewery saved. Sounded good. So from our listeners and viewers, we only have one question, and this is from Edward from the States, and he was asking us, when making a dark lager, such as a Schwarzbier or a Baltic Porter, and doing a decoction, is it best to wait to add the dark malts after all the decoction processes have been completed or not?
I would say, yeah, it's better to add it after, closer to the end of the mashing process, because I just don't like, well, let's say if you add dark malts at the beginning, too much acidity would go to your wort. So personally, I don't like that. So when we brewed Baltic porters or something like that, well, again, it's even hard to check if the starch conversion is finished when you have this dark wort.
Yeah.
So first you get as much sugars from malt as you can. You get these special notes if you use decoction, fine. Then you check the starch conversion with the iodine test, and then add dark malts, because basically they will just contribute in terms of flavor and color. That's it. They won't give any enzymes. They won't give any sugars. So it's just like color. Flavor, yeah.
And I mean, if you add it too early, you're not only looking at this noticeable acidity in there, you're also looking at like very strange astringent flavors that definitely don't have a place in your beer. Yeah. So since the chat has been remarkably quiet, and there's no more questions, at least none that I can see.
Well, you can always ask your questions using the contacts we've shown. So you can send me a message via WhatsApp or email. You can always email to Lori. So again, if you have any questions anytime, just reach to us, and that's it.
And if there was some information that maybe Alexei skimmed over a little bit for your liking, the video, as also was announced in the chat, will be online fairly soon. You can check it out later on YouTube. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you for your participation, and we will absolutely let you know as soon as we will figure out which the next presentation or what the next topic will be. I think we floated the idea of IPAs, which might be very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think you can rest assured that we will be back in May with something, and just keep an eye on both the Baltic Brewing Supplies as well as Lallemand social media channels and newsletters, because we will definitely announce something soon. And again, second wrap up, another question. So before we actually switch off the microphones, let us just go with the question that Jenny from Finland just asked. She's been enjoying the NovAL Lager, but she feels like they've been experiencing quite a big flavor difference compared to traditional lager yeasts. While it suits some of the beers, it doesn't suit the others. Do we have any experiences or ideas regarding this?
Well, yeah, we've partly discussed that. Like, if you are brewing the beer and you bind to BJCP rules that any esters are not allowed in your beer, maybe it's not the best option for you using NovAL Lager because of like slightly esters in produced by the yeast. But if you're just trying to make innovative beer, trying to make some kind of new notes to well-known styles, so that's your yeast. That will work perfectly for you. But yeah, sometimes, yes, if you are trying to make like authentic Pilsner and it's said like esters are not allowed, then just choose Diamond. It will work better.
Yeah, well put. So unless within the next 5 seconds another question arrives that we haven't noticed yet, I would say thank you again for everyone that tuned in. Thank you most of all, Alexei, for the very informative and really interesting talk on all things lager. And like I said before, we will be back soon with a very not different, but equally as interesting topic.
Yeah, definitely. Okay,
right.
Thank you all, and bye.
Thanks, everyone.